Hi guys, is everybody full and recaffeinated effectively? I'm almost there. I stole away to a shopping center and had crepes for lunch, so let me get this down. I'm trying to figure out if I can walk with this microphone. I feel a little bit like I want to sing a Whitney Houston song for you guys when I stroll with a large microphone. Let's start with this quote, and for those of you that have been in the writing world or, like to read self-help books the way I do, that's my total secret literary indulgence that I'm not super proud of. I love self-help books. So this Rilke quote: "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." So when we're talking about essay and talking about personal essay, I think one of the largest mistakes you could possibly make is to think that you are in a place with answers or in a place of certitude, or to hold yourself to feeling like that's where you need to start from. I think some of the best essays I've written have been an exploration versus a solution. So I just, going back to something I said earlier in today's keynote, discovery is much more appealing on the page versus certitude and righteousness, right? So when we think about how we can structure an essay, how we can begin this inquisition, and that's what to essay means. It means to discover, to experiment, right? To question, to attempt. That's what the actual act of essay means. So think of it almost as a verb and not a noun, not a result, but an inquisition. So you're starting with questions. You have a problem to solve. You have something that you are circling. You have something you're interrogating, something you're investigating. And if this is an experience that you've had, perhaps you're trying to make meaning of it. Perhaps you're trying to understand it. But to question it, to examine it, to have some sort of discovery is its own sort of structural arc, right? Versus coming at it with a solution, with an answer, with an agenda, with that sort of righteous tone that we have to watch out for. One is much more appealing and interesting on the page than another. So the reason I thought about bringing this quote, to begin today's talk with is I think this idea of loving questions, I think, is at the heart of the act of essaying, writing personal essays. Never has it been a better time to write personal essays. Well, maybe 5 years ago was actually the best time to be a personal essayist. Right now, there's so many options, right? There are print options, and there are so many options on the internet from where you can publish. So I want to talk a little bit today about how to navigate that, because I think it is a little bit tricky. So there's many types of essays, and there are many types of places you can publish. So you have a bewilderment of options. The litmus test that I like to think about is something that I mentioned in my keynote, which is how do we have the highest regard for a reader's time? There's so much noise on the internet, there's so many hot takes, there's so much content. Anything you can already think of has likely been done in some form, right? So I think our challenge as essayists and as writers and people who are writing personal narrative is to really move away from the expected and the already done, and to get more into the space of the specific experience, the messy experience, really letting humanity, your humanity or somebody else's humanity, be there in its messy form on the page. That in itself is very specific, very engaging, very interesting. So how do we have the highest regard for a reader's time when we make content? Now I want to pause for just a moment. I think everybody in this room and everybody who cares to write has at least one essay in them that they must write. And I just want you to write that down. What is the thing that only you can tell? The story only you can tell. I think we all have roughly 1 to 3 of these, but I think everybody has that essay of a lifetime. It's that one big story, that one big heartbreak, that one big moment of expansiveness. One thing I truly believe in is post-traumatic enlightenment. And I think that's why so many of us come to the page and write very well after we've been broken or hurt or gone through something really difficult, is because, again, going back to something I said earlier, I don't think we write well from perfect places. I don't think we write well from ease. We might, But I actually do think it's after we brush up against the world and get a little bit broken and gain insight through those experiences that we become better writers. I was having a conversation this morning. In my early years, I had written stories that had mothers in them before I was a mother. After I became a parent, I thought, shit. Where I was like, I got that wrong. And I think there's something in that process of constantly trying to reach a resolution, constantly asking, constantly staying curious. That in itself is much more interesting than thinking you know something. But anyway, I think everybody, and again, often coming from those kind of post-traumatic expansiveness moments where suddenly you get cracked open in a new way and life is remade, whether you wanted it to be remade or not. That, sometimes our one essay comes out of that moment. A moment of transition, a moment of brokenness, a moment of hardship. I know my best work has come from those places. So right now, take your notes about what is this essay for you. So I want this to be a little bit generative, and I want it to be, we're not going to do a ton of writing exercises, but I sort of want to lead you along a path so that when you go back to your desk after this conference, that you feel like you have something that you might work with or that you might think about. So I think we all have this one essay. So take a few moments. The fact that 90% of the room is scribbling right now helps, kind of underscore this point. We all know we have this, at least one. The core problem, the core issue, the core story, we all have it, most of us. And if you don't have it, maybe you're still in the process of discovery. Watch out. So here's something I want to say about that one essay. So I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they're obsessed with Hamilton right now. Like they might be a little behind, the country, but we live in Vermont, and culture reaches us kind of late. But they've been singing, the song about not throwing away my shot. This essay is not a throwaway essay. This one essay, this big one that you have, guard your content and your material. When you have this like really core material, this really core essay, this is the big one. This is not the one you try right away. Do you know what I mean? Like this is the one that takes skill and thought. If you give something think time, you're going to elevate it. You're going to elevate your approach to it. Do not try to write this one great essay right away. Okay? So this is the one you set aside and you think about. I'm going to read a Theodore Rothke quote, and it says, "Art is the means we have of undoing the damage of haste. It's what everything else isn't." So this undoing the damage of haste. To me, I think about why things are elevated when we give them processing time. When we hold it and we know we're going to write this piece, we're going to give it more thinking. We're going to take it from a place of simplicity to complexity, which is always the right thing to do. Complicate, complicate, complicate. Okay? Not necessarily in sentence structure or narrative arc, but in the actual thinking of the thing, honor its complexity. Okay? And that takes time and that takes processing. So one thing I want to do is read a few sample essays, just not the full essays, but essays that I consider to be in this area for certain writers that I admire. Has anybody read John Jeremiah Sullivan's essay collection, Pulphead? So he teaches at UNCW. He's an incredible essayist. So if you want to read someone that's from North Carolina and that is truly skilled in this form, John Jeremiah Sullivan is an excellent essayist. So he wrote an essay called Mr. Lytle. Mr. Lytle, an essay. And I think this was the essay of his life. I think it was an experience he had as a young man in college who went to live with this old Southern writer who was just not on the right side of things. And it's just one of those kind of coming of age. That's often one of these zones where these essays come out of, those coming of age moments, you know? Yes? Lytle, that's right. And it's online. You can get it online, and it's at the Paris Review. But if you just Google John Jeremiah Sullivan and Mr. Lytle, an essay. So I'm just going to read a few paragraphs of it. When I was 20 years old, I became a kind of apprentice to a man named Andrew Lytle, whom pretty much no one apart from his negligibly less ancient sister, Polly, had addressed except as Mr. Lytle in at least a decade. She called him brother or brother. I don't suppose either of them had ever voiced a terminal R. His two grown daughters did call him daddy. Certainly, I never felt even the most obscure impulse to call him Andrew or old man or any other familiarity, though he frequently gave me to know it would be all right if I were to call him mon vieux. He was, for his part, calling me boy and beloved, and once in a letter called me breath of my nostrils. He was about to turn 92 when I moved into his basement, and he had not yet quite reached 93 when they buried him the next winter. In a coffin I had helped to make. A cedar coffin because it would smell good, he said. I wasn't that helpful. I sat up a couple of nights in a freezing, starkly lit workshop, rubbing beeswax into the boards. The other older men, we were four altogether, absorbedly sawed and planed. They chiseled dovetail joints. My experience in woodworking hadn't gone past feeding planks through a bandsaw for shop class, and there'd be no time to redo anything I might botch. So I followed instructions, and with rags cut from an undershirt, worked coats of wax into the cedar until its ashen whorls glowed purple, as if with remembered life. Anyway, this essay is long, and it is rich, and it is about spending a year with Andrew Lytle, this writer and critic from this kind of old Southern guard, in the last year of his life. And it was formative for John Jeremiah Sullivan as an author, but it's also a really important time in this other character's life, right? And him coming to terms with like changing times, who this man is going to become as an adult, and it is so full of complexity. And I think if he had written this essay when he was in college or right after college, it would be a very different essay than what he was able to write, you know, a decade later. I also want to read a paragraph from Elizabeth Alexander's piece, Lottery Tickets, in The New Yorker. And it's about grieving for a husband. I read this full essay, and it was one of those things that I didn't want to talk to anyone for a few hours after I read it. I mean, I really pushed back from my desk and closed my eyes. It was that extraordinary to me. This is called Lottery Tickets by Elizabeth Alexander. The story begins on a beautiful April morning when a man wakes exhausted and returns to sleep in his 13-year-old son's trundle bed, declaring, "This is the most comfortable bed I've ever slept in." Or it begins when the wife says goodbye to the man a few hours later, walking in front of his car, switching her hips a bit, a kiss blown, as she heads to her office and he continues on to his painting studio. Or it begins as he packs a tote bag with the usual slim thermos of strong coffee made in an Italian stovetop mocha pot, a larger thermos of cold water, 2 tangerines, a package of Nat Sherman MCD cigarettes, and a plastic sack of raw almonds. The tote is astral blue and printed with Giotto angels, off to his studio for a day of painting. Then the two children will walk down Edge Hill Road from the bus stop like burros under their knapsacks, and his wife will prepare dinner while listening to Thelonious Monk and sipping from a glass of white wine that he's poured for her. The 13-year-old does his homework, and the 12-year-old practices his drumming. I am the wife. I am the wife of 15 years. I am the plumpish wife, the pretty wife, the loving wife, the smart wife, the American wife. I am eternally his wife. And it goes on. Everybody has, I believe, one of these that they can write and that they can give. But I think it's the thing that you really have to prepare yourself for. So I think there's two kinds of work for an essayist. There's all the other content you can write, and there's the stories that surround it, and then there's the big one. And you're always kind of working your skill level up to be ready to write that one. And you don't give that one away. You publish it as well as you can.